Thank you for joining the Queen's Live for World Mental Health Day 2020. Along with COVID-19, there's another health crisis that's brewing in India for a while. It's even been called a potential public health epidemic. I'm talking about India's mental health burden. While the pandemic and the lockdown have already created a deep impact on mental health, the following unkindness and insensitivity on display towards mental health and illnesses, specifically in the media, have created a lot of misinformation and inaccuracy. The Shashank Singh Rajput case has brought mental health to the fore, and everyone's talking about it a lot more. But there's a lot of misinformation. The noise has almost made us feel like the years of progress on mental health have disappeared. The need for kindness and understanding for those living with mental health issues, for their loved ones, their families, their caregivers, the need for kindness towards each other in these unprecedented times, to use the much, the phrase, the need for kindness towards yourself and self-care needs to be brought back to the table. We need to relearn what kindness means. So today, I'm here in conversation with Dr. Kamna Chibbar, a clinical psychologist and head of mental health and behavioral sciences at Fortis, New Delhi; Sandhya Menon, a Me Too activist, a journalist, a mother with BPD and a suicide survivor; and Jyotsna Siddharth, an activist, an actor, an India lead for Gender at Work, and the founder of Project Anti-Caste Love and Dalit Feminism Archive. Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. Hello.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you for having
me. Hi. Everyone's mic good?
Yeah, I think so. Thanks for that introduction, Vedina.
Thank you. Thank you for joining. So I wanted to begin by asking you all about the lockdown in general and your mental health journeys personally through these months actually, and perhaps Dr. Chibbar, for you professionally as well. Yeah, whoever wants to take that can start.
So I think this entire situation with the pandemic, I can speak about it very much from the professional aspect. We work in a space where we work with multiple individuals, in our therapeutic spaces, in our OPDs, and the pandemic has certainly impacted the mental health and well-being of a large segment of the population. And, to start with, yes, it was the uncertainty, the lack of knowledge about what or how things are going to evolve and shape up. Over a period of time, the reasons have become multifold. It's become about conflicts which have emerged. It's become about jobs which have been lost. It's become about people's lives which have been lost, livelihoods which have been lost. And there have been increasing reports of anxiety, of mood-related disturbances, depression, about thoughts of self-harm, experiencing a sort of disconnection from your social settings, from your friends, from your family members, having a difficulty in coping with those situations, and the list of the difficulties people are experiencing has only been increasing. And what's become more and more challenging is the fact that there doesn't seem to be an end in front of us. We are in a situation where we can't necessarily predict how long this entire situation is going to go on for, and that's creating its own restlessness, irritability, anger at times, and disappointment, frustration for a lot of people. And it's making us, it's forcing us into a situation where we are having to consider, how do we adapt? How do we maintain our positivity and optimism? And I think that brings with it a lot of challenges and facing a lot of issues, not just about your own self, about what choices you need to make, about your relationship. A lot of people started coming to the fore for people, which can be very, very difficult.
Yeah. What about you, Sandhya? How has the lockdown been so far in relation to your mental health? Okay. I think there's a bit of a Wi-Fi issue. Jyotsna, do you want to take that, and then we can move on to Sandhya once the Wi-Fi is sorted?
Sure.
Thanks.
All right, I think she's back.
Oh.
Can you guys hear me?
Hi. Yes. All good?
Yeah. Okay. Great. So I was saying it's difficult to for me to separate mental health from physical health and from just living my life on a daily basis. So it's hard for me to describe what the mental health experience is alone, but largely I find that the one thing that I've had to focus on very strongly has been resilience. So it's not optimism that I'm looking for, and it's not like Kamna said, some of the things that have come my way in the last 6 7 months, one of them is largely financial insecurity, because the projects that I was working on fell through and the payments weren't coming in. So the financial insecurity part is massive for anybody who has mental health issues. We know that um, financial insecurity triggers every other kind of insecurity. There's nothing as strong, for me at least, it's as strong as financial insecurity when I'm triggered by, and everything else falls apart. So I could be resilient, I could be optimistic, I could sort of say everything's going well, but when the bills have to be paid, you're like, everything else goes out of the window. So I mean, for regular people without very many mental health issues, it's bad enough. For those of us with mental health issues, it's even worse. So as far as as far as the entire spectrum of emotions is concerned, is I can't say it's been hard, because I always try and look at it from a place of, can I get past today? I'm not looking at the week, I'm not looking at the month, I'm not looking at when is this ending. I'm just looking at, can I get past today? So yeah, I've had severe loss of temper with people around me. I've generally sort of lost perspective on things like how I relate to people around me, and there are higher levels of, I hate calling it paranoia, but it is that, higher levels of paranoia, anxiety. There's this higher levels of oversensitivity to criticism. So those are things that, not everyone's doing their best. Everyone's doing their best, but we forget that, and everyone's tempers are flying all over the place. So in the first month, everyone, when my parents were around, all of that, I was sort of, everyone was trying to hold their peace so that they don't impose on anyone else. But you can't do that on a prolonged basis, right? Everyone gets on everyone's nerves. So yeah, I wouldn't say hard. It's been confusing, and it's been a learning
Yeah.
time.
What about you, Jyotsna? How has the lockdown been in regards to your mental health so far?
So for me, I think lockdown has been this time of a lot of reflection and thinking. But sadly, I would also resonate with Sandhya's thought that for me, it's very difficult to isolate
Yeah.
the work that I'm doing, the change that one wants to bring, and what is one going through within their personal life. So I think there is a very strong connect with what's happening around at the moment. I mean, there are personal issues and setbacks intertwined with the current scenario where there is just one after the other. There are incidents of brutalities and violence which is really systemic, and one hand you see migrant laborers walking on the road, and then you see you know Dalits and Adivasis and Muslims being targeted. So there is this mental health aspect that I'm constantly worried and thinking, because I'm worried about my mental health, just watching everything and not being able to cope. But at the same time, I'm also thinking about the mental health and issues of all of these people who come from such disadvantaged backgrounds, and at the same time are at the bearing the brunt of the systemic violence at the moment. And where does mental health stand there, and how do we kind of ensure that all of these intersections are met, so that we're looking at the mental health in a context of society which is deeply prejudiced and based on the caste class divide and the religious divide, and so to say. So that has been the lockdown for me, extremely traumatic, depressing, and I feel personally I can be resilient. I'm pretty resilient as a in my in individually. But the setbacks that one is experiencing externally, which one doesn't have really control over, how do you kind of like, how do you find yourself in that space, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's a difficult time for all of us, not just, I mean, because there's a compounding of a lot of factors. It is, the extended lockdown, the anxiety around COVID, around this new virus that's come, around economic distress. And then there are also issues in the news that are extremely triggering and that just add up to it. Dr. Chibar, I wanted to ask you that I know most of us are dealing with bouts of anxiety and depression even, and just uh, a lot of mental health issues. Uh, is it normal to feel like this at this time, and how can we deal with it really in a constructive way? Because this is going to be our life for some time more.
That's something which is very, very important that you're asking about, because I believe that right now it's very important for us to realize that experiencing changes in our mood states, experiencing some amount of nervousness, worry, or anxiety in a situation which is a threatening situation, it's a difficult situation, it's not akin to the normal that we are used to, is going to be, it's something that we need to expect, anticipate, and understand. It experiencing the switches in your mood, some amount of irritability, some amount of frustration, is not going to necessarily lead to the conclusion that there may be an illness which is developing or an illness which has developed. I think it's very essential for us to embrace the fact that feeling anxious is okay. Feeling low is okay. Sometimes feeling completely helpless may be also okay. So long as you're able to also ensure that you are surrounding yourself with the right kind of support mechanisms, and you're also putting in place the right kind of systems which can allow you to pull yourself out of those mood states. So what are the things that you can consider which could assist you in doing this? I think one of the most important things is that right now we are all getting pulled either into thoughts of the past or into worries about the future. And it's very essential that we try and find ways to keep ourselves grounded in the present. It's very important to keep on trying to pull yourself back into the here and now, to try and approach the situations more on a day-to-day basis, planning somewhat, but not becoming extensively preoccupied with trying to think of what's going to happen, say, in the next 6 months or the next 1 year. Because those questions don't have answers. And the more you get stuck, with thoughts of, thoughts which don't have answers, is where your anxiety builds up and where your mood start getting further impacted. So I think that's something which is very, very essential. It can be very hard to do this on your own. So that is where the role of the support systems comes in, where you can at least talk about, share, and express what it is that may be troubling you. But I also feel that it's very essential that we don't keep only talking about the things which are bothering us, because then that is also increasing the preoccupation of the mind. So it's also essential that, in the conversations from a practical perspective, that the conversations need to start shifting towards other things, wherein you can then move in the direction of, okay, what is it that I can do? How is it that I can maybe keep myself busy or occupied, or find activities or conversations with people which could allow me to filter my thoughts in a slightly better way. Those techniques, which we typically label as distraction, actually work very effectively. It is helpful to create some goals for your own self, small goals, which could allow you to feel more productive. And overall, it's important to try and just see how is it that you can keep taking those next few steps. I think it's also very important to focus on lifestyle, exercise, meditation, yoga, waking up at a certain time, sleeping at a certain time, prioritizing your own self-care, making sure that you are being compassionate towards your own experiences. If you can take care of some of these things as a bouquet, it would certainly be more helpful in combating that anxiety, or dealing with the mood states which may be developing for people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the need for self care and the need to recognize your own patterns and sort of figure out destructive patterns, try to work on better habits and things like that, is really important in this time. I want to also talk about women and mental health in particular, the pandemic has had an outsized impact on women's health. There's been an additional burden that many women have to take on, and women and non-binary people really have been dealing with a lot more mental health pressures. So, could you talk about that? Maybe, Sandra, would you like to talk about it?
So it's the work. I mean, and I'm coming from purely from a place of domestic work. The care of children, the care of aged parents, the cooking, cleaning, everything has largely impacted women, including in terms of where other work, and I'm not just talking about people like us who have privilege, but also those who are. Who have lesser and who are far more disadvantaged than us. For instance, domestic help, right? Almost all the women who do domestic work for the first month, I think, were having trouble going back to work, even though a lot of people paid them and stuff like that. But their husbands who were doing construction work or were away from the city doing other work, they've all lost their jobs. So what's happened, and I observed this, is that they're looking at they're taking care of homes, their own homes, and after the lockdown was lifted, they're taking care of homes of their employers. That's a massive burden, and that's physical as well as mental. Whereas my own domestic help, her son-in-law has lost work. She's got two under 3-year-old grandchildren. Her husband's lost work, and her daughter doesn't have work because she's just given birth to a baby. She's the only one working for all of them. And this is, it's just one story. And I'm sure if you look around, we'll find a lot of those stories. There are stories of just families where young 20 somethings have moved back with their parents, and a lot of the time they're working from home, so the burden of cooking, cleaning for a larger family now, where parents, it would have just been two old parents, with now other children, other members at home, falls on the mother. And I'm finding this so underreported and so not talked about, the fact that there is this level of uh, unarticulated angst and not illness, but pain, psychological pain that we are completely unable to address in any manner, because there's no physical clothes, there's no the places to reach out for so many of these women. It's just not there. Where's the time to be on the internet if you're from dawn to dusk, you're managing earning work as well as housework? So it's been massive, and I don't know how, like, where do we start to collect the data to talk about it in a way that helps these women? Where do you start? It's really hard.
Yeah, it is. And it's important, like you said, to bring these issues up and actually talk about mental health in a more holistic way, look at how it's impacting different people, because people are affected in various ways. There are people who are living with mental illness and the lockdown has been different for them. There are women, like you said, there are people who work as domestic help. It's had a massive impact, and to collate this data is extremely important. So we get a
Yeah.
holistic idea of mental health. Jyotsna, would you like to talk a little bit about gender and mental health a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think again, there are intersections of gender with caste and other marginalized identities that I would really like to foreground, because I feel that the narrative around mental health is also very, I would say, is very elitist and upper class in a certain way, because it's just putting out this sort of narrative where only certain kind of people can relate to it, right? I mean, there are a lot of us who live with intergenerational trauma and experiences of discrimination and untouchability and whatnot. And I feel like, of course, there are mental disorders and illnesses, but there is inherent buying of this trauma and pain that has passed on from generation to generation, whether you're a woman, whether you are a queer person, whether you're a trans person, or whether you're a person with disability, coming from the marginalized positions. And I feel like, how do you bring out some of these issues? Because the services that you have access to, or the people who prescribe a certain kind of solutions to cope, are not the reality, or are not the part of our lives in certain sense. I mean, these are very, how many people do have space? I mean, I do, but how many people have space where they have spare space to be able to do some of these things? I mean, and those are majority of the people. There are very few section of people who would have space, who would have a certain privilege and all of that. A majority of the section in this country do not have place to sleep, rest, or or they're constantly out and about doing very hard physical labor. So how do we contextualize mental health and services in that context that caters to actually 70 to 80% of people, and not just 20% of the people? I think. And then another point that I want to make is that lockdown has worsened mental health of people, and people of marginalized communities, whether they're non-binary or queer or even straight for that matter. But um, how do you deal with these aspects where people are already living with a kind of a mental illness or a disorder or something, where, and then being living in a family which is already sort of ostracized and marginalized by society, by state to a certain extent? We look at a lot of people who've been now arrested without any charge, or without having any sort of cause or reason behind it. All the political prisoners I'm talking about. What about the mental health of those people and their family members and their partners and their friends? We're seeing constantly this attack on marginalized communities. So it's also about their mental health, but people who are associated with them, and just sort of not finding enough avenues to cope, because nobody really wants to live in this misery and pain and suffering. Of course, there is a loading of mental issue that might be a different thing, but as people, we are resilient, we want to live, we want to be happy, but these are these constraints that are holding, which is really, I would ask, the accountability then lies with the state, I would say, with the mental health institutions. And how much budget are we spending as the government? How much money are we spending to create avenues and to provide resources to people to have these varied needs of mental health to be addressed?
Yeah, absolutely. And especially right now, I think it's very important when we're talking about mental health to talk about it with an intersectional lens, and also bring about ideas of access and affordability. Because when we're even talking about mental health practitioners, do we have enough mental health practitioners? We don't. But how are we making sure that we have them in not just in urban areas, or we're also making space for community healing or other avenues of healing and speaking about mental health. Sanjay, I just want to also ask you quickly, because I just heard during the live, on parenting, really, during this time, on how it has been parenting in the lockdown, because it's a completely new setup. Everyone's at home again. Everyone's doing homeschooling, etc. And especially, I want to ask that in the context of mental health. Have you been having these discussions maybe with your children on mental health? How do we talk to children about that?
So with my children, it's been, I'm a single parent, so the parenting burden largely lies on me. When I say burden, I don't mean that in a negative way. That are just responsibilities largely on me. So there are a couple of things that I'd like to, three different ways that I have observed what parenting in the lockdown has been like. One of the things that I think all parents sort of really struggled and continue to struggle with is, what do I do with my child, right? there's so much conflicting information. There is such a lot of the views and the beliefs that we ourselves hold, right? For instance, I'm very strict about screen time. I don't allow them screen time. They don't have their devices, nothing, right? So I had to sort of reevaluate my belief about screen time and about my sort of rigidity about screen time, saying how bad is it actually going to be if for 12 years of their life or for 11 years of their lives, if they haven't been exposed to too much screen time or any at all, and if I'm going to give them for give them some screen time to sort of occupy themselves, or to even just give me 5 minutes or an hour so I can sort of relax and breathe, is that going to be a very terrible thing? And is it going to mess up their minds? Is it what's it's So I had to reevaluate a lot of my own beliefs in that way. The second aspect of it is to sort of give them information that that they could authoritatively say for themselves, and sort of understand for themselves, because their friends are come, or the people that they play with, or schooling friends online, the information is very conflicting. Reading headlines in the newspapers is very conflicting. So you have to have those discussions with them so that they know that, hey, these are the facts. And there's such a lot of, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but each of us comes from a certain belief system, right? And each of us comes with political leanings. And your idea of the handling of the pandemic is going to depend on where you come from politically, right?
Yeah.
So,
So, if I could just interrupt you there for a little minute, we have a question that's actually related to exactly what you're asking,
right.
which is on talking to your kids about the news, because the media's role in our worsening mental health cannot be overstated. Especially, I mean, this past week, I was shaken up. It's difficult to have these conversations. So yeah, I just wanted to know how, like, Vaishali wanted to know how you talk to how you talk to this about how you talk to about the news to your kids.
Right. So this is the thing. First of all, I try and limit my own exposure as well as my children's exposure. You can't sort of avoid newspapers, but if possible, try and if the news does come in, just I think it's important once or twice a week to sit down with the children and talk about. And the thing is, children are great in that sense that they haven't picked up ideas and just stuck in their heads. They'll come home and say, hey, my friend said this, can you tell me a little more? And that's your opportunity. Instead of saying, I'm a little busy, you might be busy, you might be all of that, you could just log it and say, okay, fine, we'll talk about this after I'm done, and make sure you have that conversation. So one of the things that I make sure when I talk to them about the news is address their safety. So largely they're anxious, am I going to get sick? The people I love, are they going to get sick? This is the unarticulated concern and the anxiety that a lot of children have. So you make them feel safe. Every child needs to feel safe. So you make them feel safe. If you do this, you're going to feel safe. Depending on the age of your child, take them through a link or a piece of research or something that's online that is not rubbish, basically, that's verified and that's proper news, and take them through that and say, there's nothing to worry about, and I'm keeping you safe, and you got to help me keep all of us safe. So once that sort of relationship is established, where the children recognize that the small part of responsibility is also theirs, which is wash your hands and don't go too close to people and wear your mask, then they feel that sense of, okay, I got to look after this as well. So, specifically to handle news is to really sit down with them and say, what do you think? Do you think it's possible, if you clang plates and stuff like that, that the virus will go away? Or if they come up with research, if they read research saying, oh, till 2024 we're not going to have vaccines and all of that, we sit down and say, hey, nobody can tell definitively what's going to happen, right? What we can do is keep ourselves safe. So it's important to address the anxieties. It's important to listen to them so that you pick up on the anxieties. Many times the question that they have is not the anxiety that they're actually articulating. They can't, depending on the age, they're unable to articulate anxieties. The news bit, very practical tips, is to sort of limit the intake of news. Second, really explain it to them in the easiest one. Have a discussion. Can't be a lecture. It's got to be a discussion where you can find out what the anxiety that they are trying to communicate to you is.
Yeah. Also, especially I think there's been a lot more conversations on mental health that have been spurred on by the media, right from, that involves children as well, right from, at the beginning, or it seems like the beginning of the lockdown, about the boys' locker room exchange, to, just the way mental health was portrayed regarding the Sushant Singh Rajput case. So, what do you think as the media? What do you think what is the media's responsibility really, um, on portraying? How do we portray mental health and mental illnesses accurately and sensitively?
I think, can I take
Yeah,
take that? Yeah. So I'll wrap that up quickly because I feel strongly about this, because I come from the fraternity and I believe we've done such a disservice to that was our watershed moment, Sushant Singh Rajput's case, where we could have made mental health conversation mainstream, demystify something like bipolar disorder, which people don't even know the definition of, or what it means to have that could have been that moment where we could have really, really taken off from there, but it didn't happen. So one thing is to actually, and especially in relation to kids, I think it's important to sort of talk to your children about your own anxieties. Say, hey, it's normal to feel anxious, and I feel anxious, and these are my anxieties. And as far as the media is concerned, it's really important to have that discussion constantly, and not call out, but definitely criticize the media for how they're portraying mental illness. I think accountability from bosses, and this starts from like editor level. Ask for accountability, and why have you given this? Why haven't you defined what this illness is about? Why isn't there space? As reporters, push for space for these stories. And really also actively push for stories in non-English languages, in Indian languages, where this is an important conversation, and there's like limited help, in almost zero help in places where the larger population is not English speaking, and we don't know how to do that. We have these little conversations within ourselves, and the people who really need help are left out because we're blabbering away in English, and there's no really reliable information in the languages that they needed.
Yeah, no, I think it's crucial for the media to also look at, the reporting guidelines. So for suicide, there are a lot of reporting guidelines where you're not supposed to be, glorifying suicide. You're not supposed to say, first of all, died by suicide. You shouldn't be mentioning any
How?
details
Yeah.
about it. Yeah, because there has been copycat suicides that happened, and we saw that. Dr. Chubar, I wanted to ask you, when the surrounding news is so triggering and it's so distressing, and I think week on week we have been seeing just various incidents across the country, that are really troubling. And how do we deal with it? How do we stay mentally healthy while still dealing with in this atmosphere, really, in this news atmosphere?
See, it's a very hard choice that we need to start making, because we also have this tendency to try and be like the others, and in doing so, we oftentimes end up trying to consume more and more information because we believe we need to be better informed, and not just better informed, but informed to the best in the social settings or in the groups that we do occupy. And in doing so, a lot of times, and especially now, right now, what's happening is that our exposure is essentially to media platforms, social media platforms, and they are completely consumed by information of all sorts. But what we end up forgetting is we do not define our own boundaries. We don't try to develop an understanding of what is it that works for me. We do not try to prioritize that if something is not working for me, then it is okay for me to turn around and say, no, I am going to limit myself and not consume this kind of or this much information, because this is something which is going to create increasing levels of distress for me. I think it's very important for us to try and steer away from that thought of it's important for me to know. I think what's also essential is that we need to start making a choice of relying on sources which are credible, trying to get our basics in place, and ensuring that when you have the requisite information, if you need to switch off after that, you do that, and that it does not say anything which is bad or negative about you, or that you're taking an approach which is not acceptable. it's okay to say no to a lot of information if it is not work for you. And I think that's something which is very essential.
Yeah, I think thank you for bringing that up. I think it's important to also say that, we need to look for accurate sources of information, because there have been a lot of myths for various things, right from coronavirus to the way mental health is portrayed, to how depression is portrayed and spoken about. There's been a lot of inaccuracies, there's been a lot of insensitivity around that. So it's important to maybe recognize that and act on things that work. I also wanted to ask you all, in this whole time, what all have you been practicing? Like Dr. Kamna has given us some certain tips, but has there been anything that maybe Jyotsna, Sanjay, you've been practicing for self-care or general mental health hygiene?
I think I also kind of rely upon not just self care, because I think, again, it's very sort of individualistic, and our problems and our situations are not individualistic. So I think I do rely upon, again, focusing on the healing aspect, and not just my own healing, but healing of other people around me. So, if you have enough, how do you extend that to other people, which means also emotional labor, just
Yeah.
an ear to listen to people, because at the end of the day, we're all looking for validation and acceptance. And most often than not, people don't have avenues where you just have somebody listening to you without really judging you. So I think, for me, what has worked is really to also take refuge in my work that I do. And also what Dr. Kamna said, that saying no to news a lot of times, and I know this is something which is also, paradoxical, because then how do you work towards something which is called change, while not being informed? So I think that for me, theater has really been useful. All the breathing exercises that I do. At the same time, really making some time to write and connecting with other people, because we're all isolated, we're all working in silos, we all feel alone, lonely, depressed. But when you come together, when you form, rely upon your networks of support, especially friends and family, I think you connect and you know that this is not just you, and it's not just you who's suffering. There is this collective sadness and collective healing that we need to sort of work towards, and not just only focusing on one. So yeah, work and writing and also connecting with other people. I guess that's what I've been doing.
Yeah. Sanjay, is there anything you want to add? And Dr. Kamna as well, like personally, anything that you do, not just professionally.
So I very similar. I've looked for creative outlets because that's been, and I've watched it sort of. It's not something that I schedule into my day. It's something that I cannot pre-lockdown. It would be something that I would take half an hour, 1 hour to sit down and do. But post that, it feels more like a compulsion to sort of let it out. So whether that's watercolors, whether that's sketching, whether that's writing or crochet, I I I've got to do it. So I take time out. I can't help do it. So that's one aspect that I found in myself. The other thing that's really helped me is to sound strange, but to really limit my social interactions online. So whether that's personal conversations with friends, I have drastically brought down my friend circle to a circle of two people that I can really honestly talk to. And anything else I found is extraneous and is just no one is sensitive of each other's. We ask each other how you are, but I'm not sure we're willing to take on what we might open up. And not it's so that whole conversation becomes about can I listen well enough? And if you can't listen well enough, I think it's better to sort of just step back. So I've sort of reduced that space a lot. I've also taken like the usual things, right? Try and get some exercise, try and sleep. I've really focused on sleep because that got so messed up in that first 2 months where everyone was sleeping at 2:33 in the morning or 1:30 or whatever. So I try and fix the sleep. I try and focus on figuring out what I want to do online. So even social media, I've cut out on that drastically because everyone's bored and everyone's waiting to sort of pounce on each other. You can't say I drank a glass of water and come away not being criticized. It's that level of tension on social media. So I
Yeah,
just sort of step back from that. So these are things that I've just s-
help.
done to sort of keep my mind
Hmm.
together.
Hmm. Dr. Samla, is there anything specific that you personally have done?
I think I'll just add one more piece to everything that everyone else has shared, which
Hmm.
is learning to switch off. I think that's something that works brilliantly well for me. I switch off all my gadgets at a certain point in time once I'm done with my day's work, and it really helps me also switch off my mind from everything that's going around and actually allows me to be able to relax and unwind. That's a strategy that really works well. Everyone does not have to do it for extended periods of time. It could be for half an hour, 1 hour, 2 hours, but I do feel that we all need a digital detox as well. That's something which is very essential.
Yeah, absolutely. I think all of it is, self care, individualist self care, like recognizing routines, just taking care of your sleep, but also community healing. Realizing that we're all in this together but apart, and also on being an ally and being understanding of mental health, being someone who, if you can't maybe provide a shoulder to someone, you can always refer them to resources or to mental health professionals, and really help them in that way. um, Thank you so much for joining. I think this has been a wonderful discussion. Is there anything at all any of you would like to add on the topics we've spoken about so far, or any last words that you all have?
I think the only thing I would like to suggest is that mental health is something which is not just important right now. It's going to be important for forever, and it's very important that we all stay focused on it. We should not forget about this after the pandemic is over. The emphasis we're laying on it needs to continue. It's important for us to reassess and reevaluate the significance that we have been giving it, whether it is from an institutional perspective, whether it's from a societal perspective, or as individuals. And we all need to play our roles in ensuring that we come together and support each other, because it is only through our compassion, our empathy, that we will be able to ensure that as communities, we are able to thrive through these difficult times as well.
Yeah,
Yeah, just
absolutely.
adding to that, I feel, Devina, that we need to keep talking about the intersectionality of mental health, as well as I feel journalists needs to also ensure that they are working towards their own healing and mental health actively, because you are in a role where you're representing people on a very large scale. So I think it's important for journalists to also bear in mind that how do you present the stories of of people, and that has an impact on people's mental health. So it's not just a story which is out going out there, but it's going to impact everybody and their mental health depending upon where they are in terms of caste, class, gender, locations, etc. So
Yeah,
just want.
absolutely. Even within mental health, it's very important to pass the mic and have people of diverse identities talk about their identities and the various issues that are there. I mean, that's where we get to community healing, like Dr. Chibber and everyone was saying. Um, Great, thank you so much for joining. I had a wonderful discussion. I'm so happy you could make time for us, and thanks so much. Thank you.